This is Jeffrey Jackson. He is a governing body member of Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, back in 2015, Jehovah's Witnesses were called to testify in front of the Australian Royal Commission. It was this commission put together to determine the extent to which Jehovah's Witnesses were covering up child mistreatment, or CSA. This is an actual governing body member. It doesn't get higher up than this guy, okay? And he came on here and put his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth to Jehovah and lied to people's faces. Blatantly, bald-faced, lied to them. It was crazy. This is actually part 3. If you haven't seen the others, don't sweat it. This stands independently of the rest. I'll provide context if it's missing. But let's give this a listen, see what he had to say. And while we do, we're going to play some Breath of the Wild.
Now, one of the characteristics that we have identified, and I've spoken about it, and I'm sure you know this, that is manifest in the area of sexual abuse of children within institutions is the child's incapacity to tell an adult about what's been happening to them. You're familiar with that problem?
That is correct. I am familiar with that problem, yes.
Okay, let me just tell you, because it sounds like we're getting into the CSA stuff now. The real issue with Jehovah's Witnesses is not that there is CSA. You know, that's not the problem. I mean, it is a problem, obviously, but that exists in any organization, in any group of any population of people. This happens. It's somewhere in the vicinity of, 5% of the population, give or take, are people who are going to take advantage of children. And that needs to be rooted out and taken care of. They need to be protected at all costs. The problem with, say, the Catholic Church is that they were hiding it, covering it up, moving people from parish to parish so they could avoid prosecution. The problem with Jehovah's Witnesses is that they have this ass-backwards rule that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever that protects people who are perpetrating this. They say, don't call the police, call the service branch, call the elders, call our lawyers. Why? No, it should be in the book, call the police. Don't call the service branch, don't call the governing body, don't call anybody, call the cops. There's no excuse for this. That's the problem. I get that there are going to be cases of this. Why don't they get that? It's going to be widespread if they don't deal with it.
I've described it by reference to the admonition that was certainly prevalent when I was a child, that children are to be seen but not heard. You understand?
Mm-hmm. I do understand.
You're familiar with that concept?
Yes. Yes.
Is it relevant to Jehovah's Witnesses?
Your Honour, in our publications, obviously I can't give you examples now, but we'd be...
Jehovah's Witnesses are a very conservative group with traditional values and ideals. So I would say that saying children should be seen and not heard is relevant to Jehovah's Witnesses to some degree because they're traditionalists, conservatives. But I don't think that it was like... to my knowledge, I don't remember ever being taught that personally. Maybe it is a widespread issue in the religion and I just overlooked it. But they do have really weird backwards views on children and how they should act and, you know, the whole 9 yards.
Is it relevant to Jehovah's Witnesses?
Your Honour, in our publications, obviously I can't give you examples now, but we'd be very happy to do that. One of the key things we try to help parents to do is to encourage their children to communicate with them. As a missionary in the South Pacific, the cultures in the South Pacific definitely follow what Your Honour just said. If children are being disciplined or counselled, they're not supposed to speak at all. And over again, we encourage parents, no, children need to express themselves. They need to feel the love so that they can do that.
Okay, that's not really exactly accurate. I mean, like I said, they're traditionalists. Spare the rod, spoil the child. If you're not hitting your kid to keep them in line, then you're not doing it right. So I don't know that it's strictly part of doctrine, but the traditional ways, the traditional way of viewing it, are definitely part of doctrine for sure. And I feel like he's like twisting that around and making it look different than it is.
You've got the Bible there. If you go to 1 Timothy chapter 3.
Why do they keep saying 1 Timothy, 1 Corinthians? I don't understand. It's 1 Corinthians, 1 Timothy.
Yes.
Verse 4, there's a discussion of a man presiding over his household, having his children in subjection.
Yeah, 1 Timothy, that whole area of Timothy was all about women being quiet and children being in subjection and blah, 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 blah. You know, men should run the household. They're the greatest and the best and the smartest and the coolest and blah, blah, blah.
What does that mean?
That's a very good question, Your Honour. Biblically speaking, the word subjection infers respect and a willingness to comply with direction. It does not...
Your Bible then provides a reference back to Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4.
That is correct.
Which imposes the obligation on fathers to bring their children up in the discipline and admonition of Jehovah.
I actually just talked about this on my main channel recently. Or it may not have released yet, I'm not sure. But Jehovah's Witnesses did a video, a Caleb and Sophia video, about discipline. And, yeah, this is it right here. Discipline is love. And, yeah, it's all about how you should, spare the rod, spoil the child stuff. Like you should put braces around them to keep them straight and stuff.
What's the discipline of Jehovah?
So, Your Honour, the original language word that discipline, it indicates a process of teaching, educating, making a disciple.
Oh, interesting. Okay, now this is something that we can check. Ephesians 6:4. Let's look this up. So there's something called the interlinear version of the Bible. Interlinear version gives you exact word-for-word translations of the words that are used and the context in which they're used in other areas of the Bible. So right here is the word. Ephesians 6:4, it says, this is an exact word-for-word translation. I'm not even sure how to read this exactly, but this is just the words laid out as they are. And fathers, not provoke the children of you, but bring up them in the discipline and admonition of the Lord. Those are the exact words. So the word discipline here, let's check and see. It's paideia is what that word means, or is how that word's pronounced, paideia, or something like that. Here are some examples of how it was used in other areas of the Bible. To bring them up in the discipline and instruction, up in the nurture and admonition, in the discipline and admonition. All discipline for the moment. No chastening for the present. All, moreover, discipline for indeed. Okay, so it looks like here are some other examples of words and the context in which they're used. Discipline, chastening, discipline, nurture, discipline. Those are the context in which the word was used in other areas of the Bible. And what was it that he said exactly? Let's just listen to his description. I think he said teaching, right? That to be a disciple, that's not what it says. That's not what it means at all. He's simply wrong here. He's supposed to be like some language expert, right? Is he lying or incorrect or what?
An admonition of Jehovah. What's the discipline of Jehovah?
So, Your Honour, the original language word that discipline, it indicates a process of teaching, educating, making a disciple.
No, it meant to nurture in that context. Not to make a disciple. It meant to nurture or chasten.
Well, from that reference in Ephesians, your Bible takes us back to Proverbs chapter 13.
Dude, I love how they say that word, 13. That's fantastic, isn't it? 13. I love it.
Verse 24.
Proverbs 13:24. Yes.
And the exact quote is, "Whoever holds back his rod hates his son." What does that mean?
Spare the rod, spoil the child. Yep, I heard that a lot when I was little.
So, Your Honour, you'll notice there's an asterisk there on the term rod, and you see the footnote, discipline or punishment. So, in the application of this, the term rod is used as a symbol or a metaphor to indicate the authority to give some punishment. For example, in a modern day setting, my father could say to me, I don't go to the movies because I had broken some of the rules of the home.
So it's not about inflicting corporal punishment then?
It is, actually. Look, I told this story in that video I did on discipline with Caleb and Sophia, but when I was little, my dad used to have this paddle. It wasn't a 2x4, it was like a 2x8 maybe. It was probably 2 inches thick, and it was a wide piece of wood, right? And it was long too. It was, I don't know, maybe 2 feet long, somewhere in there, and maybe 1.5 feet long, and it had tape around it, like where he would grab it as like a makeshift handle, you know. And if you did something wrong, you knew you were getting the paddle every single time. It was not pleasant. And in fact, you know, he hit me so hard one time, my ass was just black and blue. I couldn't sit down. I couldn't even go to school for a week. And that's when they started homeschooling me. But anyway, when my brothers left, when they moved out, you know, grew up, got married and whatever, they designed a new paddle because the old one was just busted up and destroyed. And they like took red pen and drew like blood droplets on it and stuff because they thought it was funny, apparently. Anyway, I remember one time I broke some rule. I don't even know what it was I did. And my dad used to keep the paddle on the top of the fridge, and I just kind of pushed the paddle up, you know, over, and it fell down behind the fridge. They looked for it for hours. He used his hand after that, which is less pleasant, trust me. But anyways, yeah, spare the rod, spoil the child is a very important fundamental piece of Jehovah's Witness beliefs. You can't not hit your kid. You must. And if you don't, you're failing Jehovah. So that's kind of their position on the whole thing. Let's see how he reacts to this, because he has a vested interest in making these people believe that they don't believe in corporal punishment. They don't, which is paddling, by the way. They don't believe in spanking kids. They don't believe in when they discipline kids. He wants people to think that what he means when he says that is just like putting them in timeout, because he knows how it looks to the outside world. It looks bad.
So it's not about inflicting corporal punishment then?
It absolutely is not about inflicting.
That's weird, because he just followed the reference notes in their Bible back to the verse about paddling kids. So it definitely is. He just followed a logical line, and they're denying that line exists now.
Inflicting corporal punishment then?
It absolutely is not about inflicting corporal punishment.
It would have been when first written, wouldn't it?
How people applied it back then at that time, of course, is open to question.
No, it's not open to question. We know exactly how it was interpreted at the time. But I guess the point he's making now is that they take things in their cultural context, right? They're willing to ignore certain verses or interpret them differently or live life in a different way than originally intended in the Bible, because they realize that it doesn't really apply to modern day problems. And that's fascinating that this judge, I assume he's a judge, just got this guy to admit that. That is really interesting to me, that he admits that there are like different situations in which you should do different things. Because he just asked him if it's appropriate to take like the cultural context that existed all the way back then and apply it to today. And he said, yes. Well, here's a prime example of him not doing that, denying that he does that, even though he does. That is really interesting to me.
Well, what you're telling me, as I understand it, is that your religion, your church, is prepared to interpret the Bible having regard to contemporary social attitudes and standards. Is that right?
Obviously, Your Honour, we need to take that into consideration, but the primary responsibility we have is to think, what does Jehovah God mean by this?
And that is when it really boils down to what the governing body believes about things. It's not about what Jehovah thinks. It's what they think, because they believe they speak for God. They're God's spokesman on earth in their mind. So whatever they say is what Jehovah believes in their mind.
And we look at other scriptures. One of the problems that many folk have when they read the Bible is they take one verse and they assume it means something out of context or not in reference to other scriptures. So for our understanding, Jehovah has said that children should be raised in a loving environment. Jesus was raised in such an environment.
Well, I've taken you to the way your own church constructs the biblical references, which, as we've noticed, takes us back to Proverbs. Correct?
Dude, I love it. This judge is owning this guy.
That is correct.
But what you've given us is the understanding which your church now has about how that's to apply in contemporary society. Is that right?
He just got him in a logical trap, because earlier he said, cultural context, political context, decide, it doesn't matter. What matters is what the Bible says. And he just found an example of him disagreeing with that position, even though he doesn't. He openly disagrees with it because he doesn't want to look really, really bad by saying he thinks you should beat kids, which he most definitely does.
That's a good question. Obviously, I can only speak about what we understand this to mean now, but I would argue the case that even back in ancient times, God did not have in mind for children to be beaten up in a bad way.
Does your church accept corporal punishment of children?
Yes.
Our church accepts the family arrangement and expects that parents have the responsibility to discipline and raise their children.
Just say yes. The answer is yes. My dad used a paddle. They believe in using paddles. Yes.
That doesn't answer my question. Do you accept corporal punishment?
In our literature, I think you'll see time and time again, we've endeavored to explain that here, discipline is referring to more a mental...
No. Well, okay, fine. You know what? If he wants to take that route, okay. That specific verse in Ephesians, maybe, it was used to refer to like chastening or nurturing, right? But it referenced back to the Proverbs verse about beating children. How can he say this with a straight face? He's lying and twisting things around and making it appear different than it actually is, and he knows he is. This is a governing body member, okay? This may not mean much to, like, the average person because they don't fully understand the context that's being laid out here. But to Jehovah's Witnesses watching this, watching him blatantly flat out lie to people's faces, they know exactly what's going on now.
Point of view.
I regret to tell you, you're still not answering my question. Do you accept corporal punishment?
No.
You don't?
That's a lie! That's a blatant, bald-faced lie! Holy shit, dude! He's straight up lying, and he knows he's lying. It's mandated. It is a requirement. You must hit your kids in Jehovah's Witnesses religion. It's a fundamental piece of the religion. If you do not, you're not following Jehovah's instructions. That's how they view it. This was a lie. Jehovah's Witnesses watching this know that was a lie and don't really know how to reconcile it. They lost so many people after this came out because they know. They know that he's flat out lying to people's faces. Under oath, by the way, swore to Jehovah God that he would tell the truth and then lied to their faces.
Do you accept corporal punishment?
No.
You don't?
Not personally, no. And not.
Oh, Okay, we're not talking personally. I don't give a shit what you think personally. What I care about is if it's mandated by the religion, and it is. And by the way, he would accept corporal punishment personally if it's mandated by the religion, because he is the religion.
You don't?
Not personally, no. And not as an organisation. We don't encourage it.
Yes, they do. But you notice what he said. They don't encourage it. They do encourage it. It's a mandate. But that's not what was asked. It was asked if they accept it, if they're okay with it. Not if they encourage it, if it's a mandate.
But do you prohibit it?
Our literature has pointed out that the true way to discipline children is by educating them, not giving corporal punishment.
This is just a flat-out lie. He's just lying right now.
Your Honour, I can only tell you the spirit behind our writings.
Now, I'm sure you know that one of the problems for survivors revealed by their evidence in this very hearing is their concern about having to approach men within the church to tell their story and then have that story assessed and judged by men alone.
Yeah, so here's another problem with the instructions for what happens when somebody experiences CSA, when they're a survivor of CSA, child mistreatment, right? When that happens, it's mandated that the victim, the survivor of this CSA, is required to confront their abuser and sit in a room with them and the elders, men, and accuse them to their face directly. You did this to me. That's a requirement. They must do that. And if they don't, the elders pretend it never happened. They forget it. It's like the two-witness rule. If you don't do that, they're going to leave it in Jehovah's hands, quote unquote. That's part of the rule.
Tell their story and then have that story assessed and judged by men alone.
Oh, and they have to sit in this room with the men. Dude, I'm really, really bad at this section all of a sudden. They have to sit in the room with the men and describe in vivid detail exactly what happened to them. Vivid detail. And they have to describe if they enjoyed it to any degree and all kinds of stuff. It's really, really bad. It's so bad that Jehovah's Witnesses lost multiple lawsuits, hundreds of millions of dollars in lawsuits because of how badly they handled it. That's how bad it is.
Within the church to tell their story and then have that story assessed and judged by men alone. Do you understand?
I do understand that, Your Honour.
Now, in the society in which you live and which I live, we have seen significant change, although perhaps not yet complete, in the role which women play in the decision-making and government of our society, haven't we?
We certainly have.
Yeah. And that's a reflection of a contemporary understanding of the role and contribution which everyone in our society can make to the common good, isn't it?
Yes.
So what he's saying is women are a part of our current society right now because we're all equals and we're all equally as capable of contributing to society. I think that's what he's saying. And this guy doesn't believe that. Jeffrey Jackson, governing body member, Jehovah's Witnesses, doesn't believe that. He doesn't feel that way. He thinks that women are, for all intents and purposes, worthless. They should have no role in leadership whatsoever because that's what the Bible says in 2 Timothy 2:12, I think, or 1 Timothy 2:12. I don't remember which. So tentatively he says, yes.
Yes.
And I'm sure you know of the concerns expressed by the women who have given evidence in this hearing about the confrontation and difficulty in that confrontation which they found in approaching a male dominant structure.
there are no women in positions of authority in Jehovah's Witnesses organization. So if somebody suffers at the hands of somebody else, CSA, a woman is dealing with the effects of this, there's no woman they can talk to about this. There's no other person. They have to sit in a room full of men and describe in vivid detail what happened. And I'm talking vivid detail. Their feelings and emotions through the entire experience and literally every step of the process. It's wrong on so many levels.
You understand that?
I do understand that, Your Honour.
Is there room for the church to change that?
That's a very good question.
So the question was, you understand how it's wrong to expect children or women or whatever to sit in a room full of a bunch of older men and describe the, attack that they survived. You understand that's wrong, and that could cause serious emotional damage and could lead to people not wanting to report this stuff at all, right? He says yes. He says, is there room to change then? Because this is obviously a way in which you should change. And his answer?
Church to change that?
That's a very good question. I'm glad you asked it. Is there a chance to make elders women or make women elders? No.
That wasn't the question. At the very least, have them report these problems to the police rather than the elders. Elders shouldn't be adjudicating this at all. They should go to the elders and tell them, and the elders should call the police immediately. At best, honestly, the elders shouldn't even be a part of the equation. Somebody takes advantage of somebody else, send them to the cops, period.
No, there is no leeway there. But, Your Honour, if I could just mention...
Why is that? Can you tell me why that is?
Sure, yes. If we turn to first...
Is it because of a literal application of the Bible?
When it's convenient, yes. Literal application of the Bible when it's convenient for them.
Your Honour, it goes back to the theme of the Scriptures right from the creation of Adam, right through Israelite times to the Christian era. But in all fairness, may I just say something with regard to that?
Oh, certainly.
You see, the role of women in the Jehovah's Witness religion is a very dignified role.
Dignified, yeah. As women are to be in subjugation to men, that's so dignified, right? They're extra dignified because they get to be in subjugation to men. Other men only get to be in subjugation to certain other men, but women, they're in subjugation to all men. It's so dignified, right?
We don't make women, well, we certainly do not want women to feel like second-rate citizens.
But they are.
In God's view, men and women are equal. But
No, not in Jehovah's Witnesses' view. They're not.
Even people who fly airplanes realize you can't fly an airplane by committee. There has to be a pilot and a co-pilot. And that's the Bible arrangement. Not because of any lack of intelligence or lack of ability on the part of women. It is an arrangement that has stood the test of time.
Actually, it hasn't stood the test of time. It's been proven to be worthless over and over again, destructive. It's been proven over and over again to be counterproductive. It has not stood the test of time by any stretch of the imagination.
Now, within that arrangement, the Bible clearly states that a man does not have absolute authority over a woman, and a woman is a co-worker, a complement, the Bible refers.
Okay, he says they don't have absolute authority over women. Really? That's completely made up. This is another blatant, bald-faced lie that he's telling right now. The only way in which men do not have complete authority over women is in the sense that if the man is telling the woman to stop loving Jehovah or going to meetings, then the woman can separate from him. That's pretty much it. Otherwise, he has complete control over her, with very few exceptions.
So I think in the context of understanding how women are treated among Jehovah's Witnesses, I think if you investigate it further, you would see there are very many happy women in the marital arrangement.
I don't care how happy they are. Think about this. In Romania, Andrew Tate's in legal trouble right now, and this is the argument he keeps giving. he had a whole bunch of girls that were like working for him, right? As cam models, basically. And he was trafficking them. He was taking advantage of them. He was taking their money and keeping it for himself. And he keeps using this as an argument, like in court. Like, these women were doing it willingly. They were sending me their money because they like me and they want to. Unfortunately for Andrew Tate, consent is not part of the equation when it comes to human trafficking. And in the same vein, consent's not a part of the equation when dealing with destructive control or undue influence. Yeah, you can talk somebody into doing something that benefits you and hurts them. It doesn't mean that they made the decision in an informed way. That's why consent is not a necessary part of the equation. Doesn't matter if they consent or if they're happy or whatever. It's irrelevant. What matters is that they took advantage of people around them, period. So I don't care how many women purport to be happy in this organization.
Further, you would see there are very many happy women in the marital arrangement.
It used to be the case that all of our pilots were women, wasn't it? We changed
Pilots were women. Interesting.
that.
All of our pilots were, did we?
Were men.
All men? Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, but we're men, yes.
Yeah, we're men, and we've changed that now. And
Oh, I see. Okay. All pilots were men, and we've changed that. Now we have female pilots. Okay.
we have women who are pilots. Why couldn't the church accept that women can contribute to the decision-making processes, particularly in relation to allegations of sexual abuse brought forward by women?
The answer, Your Honour, is that we expect women to be involved in that.
No, they don't. This is another blatant, bald-faced lie. He's simply not telling the truth. No, women will not be involved in this process. It's men. It's men. They have to go to the men, the elders in the congregation, and tell them what happened in vivid detail. Women aren't part of the equation, ever. By mandate.
But in the actual role as elders within the Christian congregation, there is a very firm standard set there. There is no leeway whatsoever for that in the belief of Jehovah's Witnesses. But if I could mention, some of the reports that you've considered are from 25 years ago. And if I understand correctly from what little I heard of the Commission in the last few days...
I mean, they were started 25 years ago, but they're still in effect today, like right now. And he's the guy that can change it. Sure, they were from 25 years ago. Fix it. You can't complain that they're bringing up things from 25 years ago if they're still in effect and you have the possibility or the ability to change those things.
Mr. Spinks very accurately described that there has been more an awareness of Jehovah's Witnesses to make sure that any victim who has been a victim of a horrible crime does not be required to actually go before three men. We've made changes, Your Honour.
Talking about a judicial committee, that's 3 elders. And did he just say it's not required to go? Yes, it is. What's he talking about? This is another blatant lie.
Has been a victim of a horrible crime does not be required to actually go before 3 men.
Yes, they are. What's he talking about? They are required to confront their accusers. I'm sorry. They're required to confront the accused, the person that they're accusing of this. They most definitely are required, or it says leave it in Jehovah's hands. Nothing will happen.
We've made changes, Your Honour, because those changes in the actual technicalities of the policies don't change. They're not affected by the actual Bible principles, except the very important principle of showing love, empathy and concern and trying to avoid any form of trauma. And that's our desire. If it wasn't perfect before, which it wasn't, we've tried to change that. And we will make further changes when we consider the recommendations of the Commission.
Well, we'll come back to your process.
Okay, so interesting. He says they're going to make more changes. Well, this is, 8 years ago now. Did they? Did they make changes? We know. The answer is they did change one thing. Here's what they changed. It used to be that elders were expected to not involve outside authorities under any circumstances and go to jail if they were legally required to. Here's what they changed. Now, if they're going to be sent to prison, then they can, reveal what they know. Rather than go to prison, they're allowed to reveal what they know. That's number one. And number two, they said you can call the police if you choose. Not the elder, but the elder is supposed to tell the victim, if you choose, you can call the police. So those are the two changes. They can tell the victim that they can call the cops if they want, but the elder will not. I mean, obviously that didn't solve the problem at all. In fact, did it even do anything? Did it make any corrections to the problem at all? I mean, how many people's lives are saved now as a result of this?
The recommendations of the Commission.
Well, we'll come back to your processes later on. I'll leave you now with Mr. Stewart.
Thank you, Your Honour.
Just on the last point, Mr. Jackson, with regard to a survivor of sexual abuse having to make the allegation directly to the accuser, do you agree that in those circumstances, should a survivor have to make the allegation in the presence of the accused?
Right. That's part of their belief system. The accuser has to make the allegation in the presence of the accused. And seriously, a 6-year-old kid sitting in front of a big dude that has just threatened them and mistreated them, done something terrible to them. What's wrong with them, really? What's wrong with them? What's going through their heads?
I agree that it would be better for them not to do that unless the victim wants to do that.
Yes, well, that's why I phrased my question in the way that I did. And so
it's a requirement, and in fact, it's still a requirement right now.
I'll repeat it, that do you agree that in those circumstances the survivor should have to make the allegation in the presence of the accused?
In no circumstances should that ever be an expectation.
Sorry, I don't understand your question. Could you rephrase it?
Really? You don't understand the question? Come on. He's not even halfway believable.
Do you agree that there are no circumstances in which the survivor of a sexual assault should have to make her allegation in the presence of the person whom she accuses of having assaulted her?
I agree that that is the case.
And
No, he doesn't. You know how I know? Because he's the guy that writes the Elder's Manual, and that's not a part of it. And as a matter of fact, 5 years after this came out, they released a new version of their Elder's Handbook, and that's still nowhere to be found in the new one, 5 years later.
Presence of the person whom she accuses of having assaulted her.
I agree that that is the case.
And as I understand you're saying on your understanding that that's not required by your rules. In other words, your rules do not require the survivor of a sexual assault to have to make her allegation in the presence of the person whom she accuses as having assaulted her.
If I understand your question correctly, from what I've heard from Mr. Spink's testimony, that is not something that we require now.
It is, as a matter of fact, something that they required at the time, yes. And it's still something that's required. I think they changed it to make it so that it'll still be investigated and that person will still be disfellowshipped, whether the person accuses them or not. But it's still part of the equation. They still expect people to approach their abuser, basically.
The preface is this and the fact that it's not my field that I work with every day. Mr. Spinks and those who work.
Well, if the elders had not, if the governing body members hadn't ducked this commission this entire time, maybe they could have gotten the right person in for this. But as a member of the governing body who's from Australia, he'll do. He can answer for their crimes.
The fact that it's not my field that I work with every day. Mr. Spinks and those who work in the service department work with these matters. But that is my understanding.
Yes. And so do you accept then that that should be made clear in your documents, manuals, and instructions. In other words, that it should be made clear that a survivor of a sexual assault should not have to make her allegation in the presence of the person whom she accuses as having assaulted her.
Absolutely.
That was not the position at the time. I mean, he's just lying here. And it wasn't until 5 years later that they made any changes to the book at all, let alone the proper changes that they needed to make. They still haven't really made those.
Now, Mr. Jackson, can a branch committee publish its own manuals and guidelines in respect of judicial committee procedures for responding to allegations of child sexual abuse?
No. The answer to this is no. They have to follow the Elders Manual, which is a deeply guarded secret, and it's the same for every single elder in the entire organization. There's a big list of things that are basically just fellowshipping offenses, and you just have to follow that book, and that's it.
I would think it would be unusual for that to happen, seeing it's not my field.
It would be apostasy, and he knows it would be apostasy. They'd be disfellowshipped instantly if they tried that.
Per se, I couldn't give an inclusive answer with regard to that, but...
Yes, he can. He can tell the truth, which is it would be apostasy, it'd be heresy. It'd be against the rules. And he knows this. He's just lying here again. Wow, this thing is really starting to heat up, actually. I'm going to write this one down, too.
As far as the general principle goes, I would expect that they would get back to the service committee on it.
Well, what we see in the documents that we have that govern this issue currently is that they are documents which originate under the auspices of or with the approval of the governing body.
Right, exactly. The governing body calls all of the shots for this stuff. There is no room for movement here.
So I'm referring to... Yeah, sorry, Mr. Jackson.
Sorry, my apologies.
So I'm referring to organize to do Jehovah's will, shepherd the flock of God.
Okay, organized to do Jehovah's will is a manual for unbaptized publishers, maybe baptized publishers, I'm not sure. I got a copy of it. It used to be green. And Shepherd the Flock of God is an elder's manual that people aren't even supposed to be aware exists. The fact that he brought it up just now probably deeply unnerves the governing body member. I have every copy all the way back to like the 60s or something now.
Jehovah's will, shepherd the flock of God, and the guidelines that are published to the branch committees.
Thank you. It's a rather long question, but if I've understood it correctly, we would expect the general framework of what we do to be published as approved by the governing body. But you see, when we say published, letters are published by the local branches that indicate any variance that may need to take place with regard to those policies. So that's why I was just hesitant to say that it's all-inclusive.
But that makes no sense. He's just completely full of it.
Well, if the Australia branch, for example, was to decide that the investigative step which precedes the appointment of a judicial committee need not be done by two elders, but can in Australia be done by a woman acting on their behalf, would that be something that would be open to the Australia committee to follow?
That's a good question. Wow, that's super interesting. So one of the steps that you're supposed to take if you discover that there's CSA taking place is not to call the cops. It's instructed that if the victim wants to call the cops, they can, but the elders are not to involve the secular authorities. The first step they take is to assign two elders to investigate, to talk to the victim, to talk to the accused, and sit down in a room with both of them simultaneously where the victim can accuse the person directly to their face. That's what was in the elders book at the time. Like I said, there are a couple of updates that aren't really super relevant for this conversation in the 2020 edition, I think, or 2021. But anyways, so they're saying, is it possible for a woman to step in and do investigating instead of like the, two male elders. In my opinion, there's no reason to have any of that. Like, they shouldn't even involve any of this. Call the cops. There shouldn't be a committee that meets, judicial committee, and people investigating. No, just call the cops. Why is this a problem? Why can't they just do that? And if the guy's convicted, disfellowship him. Just like that.
Or to adopt?
Mr. Stewart, I certainly would hope that the Australia Branch Committee would get back to the Service Committee with the reasons why that's needed, and then eventually I would hope that would get to the governing body so that we could approve whatever changes are needed worldwide.
But it may be that the...
Right, so they cannot make those changes themselves. They have to ask the governing body. That's what this was. And the answer is women are not allowed to have any role in decision-making or anything at all in this organization.
Whatever changes are needed worldwide.
But it may be that the branch committee in Australia has a different view on these matters than the branch committee in some other country. We'll take one close to home, New Zealand, for example. Well, let me do one further afield anywhere, if you like. The Philippines may take a different view. Is there space for the branch committees to have different investigative procedures in different parts of the world?
The answer is no.
To answer your question, the answer is yes.
Wow, dude. This is a flat-out lie. I cannot believe this dude is just blatantly lying to these people's faces. He just said the answer is no, effectively. I mean, it was in a veiled way, but that's what he said. And then he says the answer is yes. This is crazy. I cannot believe he was so blatant with that lie. Seriously. That's nuts. Hold on, let me see. 102.30. I got to write this one down, too. This is crazy. Took an oath to Jehovah God, put his hand on the New World Translation of the Holy Scriptures, and swore to God to tell the truth in this hearing, and then lied to their faces under oath.
To answer your question, the answer is yes, that is possible, but if the reason for doing so is to avoid trauma, then that's something the governing body is interested in. We want to see how we can encourage all the countries to avoid that.
So, okay, he's saying, yeah, I like this idea, actually. We should appoint women to investigate these matters of CSA. Like, they just suggested something. Now, we have the benefit of hindsight, right? We can look back and tell, did they implement this change? He just said, I love this idea. This is a fantastic idea. We should be doing this more. Did he implement it? Of course not. It was a lie the whole time. He lied under oath.
But if it's a matter of technicality that they need to do it a certain way, then yes, we would expect they would at least notify us, and there could be differences.
Mr. Jackson, is there any biblical impediment to a woman being appointed to investigate an allegation?
There is.
No, there isn't.
A woman being appointed to investigate an allegation?
There is no biblical impediment to a woman being involved with the investigation.
Of course, he believes that there is. Women should have no role in any kind of administrative anything. The best they can do is go knock on doors full time as a pioneer. That's as high as they can get in the organization. He's just lying here too, just blatant, bald-faced lie.
In fact, I think... Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
You know, you would think that if he really believed this, in the intervening 8 years or so, which is roughly how long it's been since this came out, those changes would be implemented. Have they been? No. Of course they haven't.
Your Honor.
No, you continue.
And I think that's one of the benefits of the Royal Commission, as what has been brought to light, is that certainly it is good for a woman to be involved.
Oh, there you go. Put a puff in their petticoat. That's why this Royal Commission is good, because you're bringing ideas to light that we can implement in our everyday life. No, it's completely made up, dude. They never implemented any of this. This is all a blatant lie. After swearing on the Bible that he would tell the truth, he's lying.
Particularly some of these sensitive areas. But if I could just mention, many of our publications are very broad in aspect. We're not just talking about this one aspect of child abuse, which is a horrific crime, but it can also, the same principles are used for other sins such as drunkenness and other things the Bible mentions. But in this sensitive area, yes, I think the Commission has clearly shown that it would be good for women to be involved.
And come to find out, they never did involve women. Isn't that interesting how that works? They were lying to them the entire time. See, this is why it's valuable to like go back and examine this in retrospect and see like how they framed things and what they believe and all that stuff. Because we can see when they were simply lying all these years later.
It's clearly shown that it would be good for women to be involved.
Is there any biblical impediment to a determination, a judicial determination, being made by a body which includes women?
Oh, interesting. So is he saying, is there any like biblical basis to exclude women from judicial committees, like a committee that would disfellowship somebody, for example? And the answer is no. It says they're not allowed to teach. Now, judicial committees are not teaching. They are administrating, I guess. They are deciding if somebody should be banned or whatever. It's a little bit different, it seems to me, but okay.
Although the elders thereafter may respond in terms of the as the decision maker in relation to what happens to someone after a decision has been made as to the truth or not of an allegation.
So can they be on judicial committees is the question here.
That's a good question. Could I just mention first, Your Honour, something, please bear with me on this. The judicial system that Jehovah's Witnesses use is not in competition with the criminal justice system. We respect that, and we feel that that's something that the community needs to make use of.
Well, that's something they say on paper, but when it all boils down to it, Jehovah's Witnesses have always had an interest in replacing the secular government because they believe at some point in the near future, any 5 minutes now, there's going to be a time when the secular governments fall. And when that time comes, they're going to have to step in and take control of everything for their people. They're going to have to step in and protect their people from blah, 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 and their people are it's going to be their own government. They've been trying to form their own government since the beginning. They've always tried to create their own government. And as a result, they don't involve secular authorities to any degree if possible, ever. That's really the core issue here. They believe it's wrong to involve secular authorities in anything under any circumstances, and that's why it doesn't specifically instruct elders in their elders' handbook to call the cops if somebody does something wrong. They should be dealing with it directly, just them. That's the problem here.
But also, if I can just highlight, any victim is not viewed as someone that needs to stand before a judicial committee. They did not do anything wrong.
No, but they have to approach the judicial committee and communicate with them and face the accused directly, according to the Elders' Handbook at this time.
The ones that have been victimized, they need the help. Now, to answer your question directly, women can be involved in this very sensitive area, but...
No, they can't. It's banned. They're not allowed to be involved in any way, shape, or form, ever. And they still aren't 8 years later. This is just a lie.
Biblically speaking, the role of judges in the congregation, it lays with men. That's what the Bible says.
There you go. Now he's telling the truth about the judicial committee. And what evidence does he have to back this up? The fact that at no point in the Bible were women judges. Not that it specifically condemns it, but that women were just simply not judges in the Old Testament. It doesn't condemn it, actually. And we can see a clear example of how it would be helpful in this case for women to be on judicial committees. But because it wasn't actively in the Old Testament, he's going to ignore it completely. It's the same logic they use to back up their belief about birthdays. You know, if you don't celebrate birthdays because there aren't any examples of, you know, a good birthday party, basically. Every birthday party in the Bible just sucked. Like, it wasn't fun. Somebody lost a head. And that's their justification. Though they completely ignore that logic when it comes to dogs in the Bible, they're applying it to women because that's convenient for them, and they're applying it to birthdays because, again, convenient. It's a convenient way of isolating their members from the rest of society so that they have one less cultural connection to everybody else.
Of judges in the congregation, it lays with men. That's what the Bible says, and that's what we endeavour to follow.
Can you give me the reference for that?
Oh, I love it.
Yes. In the scriptures,
that is judges being only men. Not elders, but judges being only men.
Okay, I would have to check it. I think Deuteronomy is one of them. But
I don't deny that they had, like, judges in the Old Testament that were men, but that doesn't say that only men are allowed to be judges. It says, like, that, you know, judges were by and large made up of men. Distinct difference to be had there.
But with regard to 1 Timothy chapter 3, 1 Timothy chapter 3.
He's repeating it the same way he does when he gives a talk. That's how you're supposed to do it when you talk about, like, when you're up there at the lectern giving a talk or whatever, you give them a second to turn to the page, even though you had a bookmark in it, because it takes a second to flip there.
And I'm sure Your Honour, you're very familiar with this. In verse 1, the statement is trustworthy. If a man is reaching out to be an overseer, he is desirous of a fine work. The overseer should therefore be irreprehensible, a husband of one wife, moderate in habits, sound in mind, orderly, hospitable, qualified to teach, not a drunkard, not violent, but reasonable, not quarrelsome.
Wow, that's actually really interesting. You know what? I didn't realize this, but is being married a qualification for being an elder? It's not a qualification for being a ministerial servant. I know that for sure. That's like one step below being an elder. It's like you're on your way to being an elder. But is it a requirement for being an elder? That's interesting.
Not a drunkard, not violent, but reasonable, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. A man presiding over his own.
What about, I wonder if it's allowed for an elder to, I know that you know, a lover of money is banned, but can they be a lover of your mom?
Reasonable, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. A man presiding over his own household in a fine manner, having his children in subjection with all seriousness. In biblical times, the same expression that is used for elder is also used for older man. And when we're translating, of course, that is my field, sometimes it is hard to decide whether it means elder as in a position or older man. But definitely when it speaks of judges at the gates in Israel, we're talking about older men. But I apologize, Your Honour, seeing you asked this question, I cannot give you the exact scriptural reference, but we'll be happy to do that.
We would appreciate it, because one possible modification to meet this issue of the lack of women as judges of allegations brought forward by women against men may be a modification of your process to include women in the judicial determination step. You understand?
So he's saying that could be a solution to this problem, partly. It would at least contribute to the correction, having women, you know, adjudicate issues in the congregation from time to time, especially if it's in, like, cases of CSA. That'd be a lot better. I agree.
I do understand, Your Honour, and we will make sure you get those references.
And can you understand how...
They never did get those references, because they don't exist.
I understand, Your Honour, and we will make sure you get those references.
And can you understand how a young woman, any woman might feel when allegations which she makes of having been sexually assaulted by a male are determined exclusively by men?
In the context of a police station, I can understand that, Your Honour, but please, may I also mention the role of these elders. They are friends of those in the congregation. Their role is to shepherd, help, care for. And so although perhaps a young person may feel that way, and we would do everything we can within the Bible parameters to make sure that that is eased so that a person isn't put in that very difficult situation.
But they don't seem to understand what this is all about. They don't seem to understand how hard it is to come forward about something like this in the first place. And for an 8-year-old girl to have to come forward about this to a bunch of old men, maybe who look just like the attacker, is wrong. It's just wrong. It's morally wrong. They don't seem to get that. They don't seem to, the dots aren't connecting for them. And obviously the dots never did connect because to this day, they haven't made that change.
But still, ultimately, the decision, maybe without that person, would be made. And the decision is not concerning the criminality. That is the criminal system. The decision is concerning the spiritual cleanliness of our congregation and the rehabilitation of those that commit sins.
That's to concentrate on the abuser. But what I'm talking about is the position of the person who's been abused. Do you understand?
I do understand that.
So all that you've just said is talking about it from only one perspective, you see?
Mm-hmm. So from the other perspective, with a victim, the main thing for us is helping, supporting, and guiding, and women will be involved with that. You see.
But they aren't. They never were, and they never corrected that problem. It's still, to this day, a problem.
The Judicial Committee is not judging the victim. The elders in the congregation and the women in the congregation have the obligation to give full support to any victim.
Well, that may be so, but the point I was seeking to have you address was, can you understand how a woman might feel when allegations which she brings forward against a man in the congregation are considered and judged entirely by men?
Obviously I'm not a woman, so I wouldn't like to speak on their behalf, but the two of us, I'm sure, could understand from what has been expressed and believe that perhaps there would be a hesitancy there.
And can I add this to the question, because it's one of the factual circumstances we face in this hearing. Can you understand the circumstance for a woman who brings an allegation against an elder?
That would be a tough situation, absolutely.
Who's a friend of the others who must judge the truth or otherwise of the allegation. Can you understand how that person must feel?
I can try to understand it, Your Honour, yes. But again, could I ask, and again, this is not my field of activity, but as far as I understand, we have a process in place whereby a neutral member, like a circuit overseer, will be involved with such a sensitive case.
Bullshit. Okay, the circuit overseer visits once every few months, and they give a single talk, maybe 2 talks every 6 weeks or so, and they don't deal with individual issues like this. Circuit overseers deal with elder deletion and stuff like that. Like, this is a completely made-up answer, and he knows it is. This is not the place of a circuit overseer. This is standard Jehovah's Witness business. He's just lying here, and he knows it.
It would be the case, would it not, that even a circuit overseer is going to know an elder well?
Yeah, they're going to have a personal relationship with these elders, absolutely. Because, like I said, they're in charge of deletion or appointing an elder.
They should be familiar, but they also know the victim well.
No, they don't. They don't know the people in the congregation almost at all. They deal very closely with the elders. And they make a habit of taking the young people out in service with them when they visit once every 6 weeks to try to give them some encouragement. They're like celebrities within Jehovah's Witness circles, right? The circuit overseers are like really high up in the organization and represent the ultimate form of, like, I don't know what the word I'm looking for here. The ultimate form of spirituality. They deal with elders directly, and that's it.
You see, it's not taking into consideration the spiritual responsibility. You see, these elders are not paid to do their job. They do it because of love and concern and wanting to shepherd.
No, because of brainwashing, but okay.
They're not paid to do their job. They do it because of love and concern and wanting to shepherd the flock. And so I think what we're missing is the spiritual element to this whole thing, where people are comfortable talking to one another.
Well, I don't know whether you heard the evidence of the survivors here. Did you hear that evidence?
No, unfortunately, that was a bad time for me caring for my father. I apologise. But I will look forward to hearing a summary of it.
Right, he'll look forward to hearing a summary. I bet, totally. Listening to what the survivors had to say is kind of probably considered apostasy or heresy. Like, any other Jehovah's Witness is banned from hearing them out. They're not allowed to listen to this stuff because they are in opposition to the governing body or the way that things currently run. If you oppose the way things run right now, then you're an apostate and you're evil and you're just going to die in Armageddon, be annihilated.
Yes, Mr. Stewart.
Yes, because, Mr. Jackson, for example, the elders who hear these allegations, one of the things they have to do is to measure the credibility of the person who says that she suffered abuse. Is that not right?
Yes, as a prosecutor would also measure the evidence that he does before he goes to a case.
Well, not so much the prosecutor. Perhaps you're thinking of the judge.
Sorry, no. If I understand correct, well, I'm going way out of my field because I'm not a lawyer, but I thought any case that...
Okay, he kind of stuck his foot in his mouth on that one, didn't he? They're supposed to be judges, right? Not prosecutors. Like, it's a judicial committee. They're determining if this person is telling the truth or not. They're not prosecuting this victim.
Well, I'm going way out of my field because I'm not a lawyer, but I thought any case that would go to the police and then brought to the prosecution, you'd have to at least establish there was some validity. Yes, maybe that's not the case in Australia.
Well, the point is this, Mr. Jackson, isn't it, that you've appreciated, I think, that an elderly man may be in a difficult position to understand just how a young woman, for example, making an accusation or an allegation of child sexual abuse feels in having to make that allegation.
That is true, but at the same time, perhaps someone who's never experienced the trauma that these victims have felt, even a woman may find that very hard as well, because it's such a personal experience.
But you'll accept, I'm sure, that in many instances where a woman or young woman makes such an allegation, she would feel a lot more comfortable having to make the allegation and explain the circumstances.
Oh, absolutely. To a woman, yeah, 100%. They shouldn't have to explain the allegations or confront the accused or any of that stuff. Like, this is so ass backwards, all of it.
To another woman.
I can't say that I would give a comment on that, Mr. Stewart, because you see, again, it takes away the consideration of the relationships in our congregations. It's not like your churches where people just go to church and don't talk to one another.
Does he think people don't talk to each other in churches? Are you kidding me? Yeah, churches on the outside, they suck. They don't even know each other. They just come to church and then they sit in the pews. They don't even listen to anything being said. It's pointless.
Their congregations do become familiar, and there can be a friendship. So I agree at the point you're trying to get at, we need to know what the victim is comfortable in doing with regard to who they speak to.
Well, you gave us a scripture, 1 Timothy 3 verse 1, which as I understood it was the authority for the principle that, as it's put there, an overseer, but in, I think, modern language, an elder, must be a man. Is that right?
That's correct.
And is there a scriptural reference, and perhaps this is the one you said you'd need to come back to us on, is there a scriptural reference which says that the investigation of allegations of serious misconduct must be done by an elder?
That's super interesting, the point that he's making here. So, is there anything in the Bible that says that the investigations should be done by elders specifically rather than somebody else? Can't it be a woman? The answer is no. There's nothing in the Bible that says it can't be a woman.
If I could just clarify your question a little, Mr. Stewart. You see, what I think you've heard in the Commission is that we have said that women can be involved in all these various aspects leading up to the actual decision-making, whether...
What aspects? What things would women be involved in other than the decision-making? The answer is nothing. There's nothing that women could be involved in leading up to the decision. This is completely made up.
Whether or not someone is spiritually qualified to remain in the congregation. So just that one aspect, the actual judicial committee itself, is where we believe that men would be involved.
Well, Mr. Jackson, that's the question I was putting to you, you see. I was wondering whether you could have a structure which meant that the judicial decision as to whether or not the allegation was true could be determined by a body capable of having women represented on it, and that body's decision would then be taken to the elders in relation to decisions to disfellowship. Do you understand?
I understand, Your Honour.
Well, is it possible to make that change?
It is possible to make sure that elders are fully aware of the whole story. But for women to be elders in the congregation, that is not possible.
No, Mr. Jackson, I wasn't asking you that. I was asking you to consider. Sorry. I was asking you to consider whether the process may involve a determination which we outside the church would call a judicial determination. That is the allegation true or false? And then that decision having been made, the elders would then make a decision as to the consequence being.
So can you involve women in the process at any point, anywhere? And the answer is no. And we know that because we have the benefit of hindsight. They did not make that change. Women are not involved in the process anywhere along the line at any point 8 years later. So the answer is no, right?
Having been made, the elders would then make a decision as to the consequence, being disfellowship or otherwise. Do you understand?
I do understand.
Could women be involved in the determination of whether or not the allegation is true?
Well, Your Honour, if I could say, I think they already are involved.
No, they're not.
In the decision, Mr. Jackson. Please address my question.
Okay. Yes, well, please, could I just use an example? If an underage child it says that something has happened, and then two women are involved with helping that person, surely they have to decide whether or not the facts are true and present those to the elders. Otherwise, how would the elders know what the facts are?
Mr. Jackson, you're not dealing with my question.
Dude, I love it. They hold his feet to the fire, right?
I'm sorry, I apologise.
Would you like me to put it again? Would you like me to put it again?
If you would, please.
Your process at the moment has a judicial determination which is made by the elders. And that's the point at which a decision is made as to whether the allegation is true or false. Do you understand that?
Mm-hmm.
You do?
I do understand that, Your Honour.
Is it possible for the process to be modified so that that decision can be made by a body which could include women, that is, the decision as to whether or not the allegation is true or false.
The answer is no. The answer is no. Women are not allowed to be involved to any degree at all, and they never made that change, obviously. The answer is no to this question. He could just say no.
Made by a body which could include women, and that decision would thereafter be acted upon and a decision made as to whether or not to disfellowship by the elders. Do you understand?
I do understand, and I apologise, Your Honour, for not answering directly. I didn't understand fully what you were saying.
Oh, he understood.
The answer, Your Honour, is...
The answer is no. Women cannot be involved.
Such a situation would be worthy of us considering and doing research and checking the scriptures.
What a cop-out.
Yes, the possibility of considering that is there.
No, it wasn't. It was never there. The possibility was never there. And it never happened. It's just a blatant, flat-out lie again.
Thank you, and I apologise again.
Mr. Jackson, I'd like to refer you to Shepherd the Flock of God, which is...
That's their internal elders manual. People aren't even supposed to know about this. Women aren't, like, even wives of elders, nothing is hidden between, elders and their wives except this book. You're not allowed to talk to your wife about it. It's never supposed to be in the same room as her if it's outside of a locked case. That's why Jehovah's Witnesses carry briefcases. Because their wives, their family members, and no one is supposed to know this book exists. And we have a copy of it, thanks to some elders who defected, basically.
Which is tab 120 at page 71, ringtail 72. Now, this is the manual for elders, and it's been...
He's probably really disturbed by the fact that they know about this book.
Applicable since, as I understand it, 2010, is that right?
Yeah, this is the 2010 edition. Again, they came out with another edition in 2020, I think, maybe. And the 2020 edition didn't really update anything worth even mentioning, honestly.
This is, yes, that appears to be the case.
And would it be the case that this manual came through the processes of the writing committee?
This manual would have been prepared with the help of the service departments.
Oh my God, dude. I cannot believe that they're actually asking him about this manual. This is fantastic. I love it.
And the service committee would have prepared this information. And yes, the writing committee wouldn't have needed to read everything and check to see it's scripturally applicable.
Yes.
God, I can't believe he's actually, talking about this book right now.
And what I'm showing you page 71, but that's in chapter 5, which is headed determining whether a judicial committee should be formed. And
Right, so if you don't know what a judicial committee is, it's basically a group of 3 elders that come along and hear about some sin that somebody committed. They smoked a cigarette. They drank alcohol when they were too young. They have a girlfriend on the outside world or something like that. They hear about this. They form a judicial committee, and the judicial committee votes, basically, on whether or not that person should be excised from their community permanently. Should they be allowed to talk to their friends and family that they grew up with, or banned from speaking to them for the rest of their lives? That's basically what a judicial committee is.
it starts out by setting out various wrongdoings, serious ones, including manslaughter, attempted suicide, premier, and so on. So that's
You're right. So he's listing the things that are disfellowshipable offenses right now.
the context. But you'll see at paragraph 37, it says, even though a Christian has been accused of wrongdoing serious enough to require judicial action, a judicial committee should not be formed unless the wrongdoing has been established, and the word established is in italics. So my question is, who is it who decides whether the wrongdoing has been established?
The reason they're holding this committee hearing at all is because some people found a loophole in their system. Now, Jehovah's Witnesses operate off of something called the two-witness rule. The two-witness rule is a Bible rule that existed for, like, contracts and stuff. You know, you want to sell somebody this donkey, then there have to be two witnesses to the transaction, or it's like it never happened. It's like a civil matter, you know? Like, it makes sure that you're protected in case somebody denies contract signings or whatever. Well, Jehovah's Witnesses picked up the two-witness rule intended for, like, civil matters and applied it to criminal matters. You can't assume that something is real unless two witnesses come forward, or two victims. So if a kid is mistreated by somebody, there have to be two victims before Jehovah's Witnesses move forward with it, or two direct witnesses. Now, the very obvious loophole that I'm sure everybody has already seen is the fact that people were taking advantage of kids and then moving to another congregation. Elders can't say a word to anybody because there weren't two victims. It's like it never happened. And they would move to a new congregation and re-offend with somebody else. And once again, the elders couldn't say a word, so they'd move to a new one. And this happened over and over and over and over again. It's the most glaringly obvious loophole in existence, right? And up to this moment right here that we're watching, they never closed that loophole. They never fixed it. Now, in their 2021 edition of their handbook, I think it was, 2021 edition, they released a new sentence in there that says, you don't have the responsibility to call the police. As an elder, you don't need to call the cops if you hear about this stuff. But it's not a sin to call the cops if the victim so chooses. So you can inform them if you'd like that they are free to call the police, but you shouldn't, you should stay out of it, basically. You should investigate to the best of your ability, and if there are not two witnesses or two victims, then leave it in Jehovah's hands, quote unquote. That's what it says, i.e., do nothing at all, pretend it never happened. That's the 2021 edition of their handbook. That's what it says. That was 6 years after this happened. That was their correction. So anyways, that's the problem here. So now they're asking this guy, how do you decide that wrongdoing is taken place? How do you know that wrongdoing is taken place? Like, who is in that committee or whatever that makes those decisions? Because it's, he's trying to draw out like the two witness rule, sounds like. And it's obviously a flawed method, right? Like, it doesn't get more obviously flawed than this. So with that context, keep listening to what he says here.
Who decides whether the wrongdoing has been established?
So it is my understanding that two elders normally would investigate the matter to see if there is some substance.
Right. Two elders investigate, three elders do the judicial committee once it's been established.
Accusation, having in mind, as you mentioned, this could be ranging from someone getting drunk to someone committing immorality and so on. So those two elders would at least see if there was some basis of the accusation, and they would get back to the body of elders, who then would appoint the judicial committee.
Yes. So then the question is it scripturally necessary that that role is performed by two elders?
No, the investigation thing. No, it's not scripturally necessary that it's two elders. It could be women. That's what they were arguing in the previous part, if you missed it, that women should be allowed to take an investigative role, particularly in cases of, CSA, where a kid has been taken advantage of and needs to talk to somebody. Like, why does it have to be an elder? Likely somebody who looks just like the person who hurt them possibly in a similar age, and may even have a very close relationship with that person. Jehovah's Witnesses, men are not allowed to be close friends with women and vice versa unless they're husband and wife or a family member. You're not allowed to hang around men and women. So if it were women that were doing the investigating, it would be guaranteed virtually that they wouldn't have a bias or a super close relationship with the accused. So it's a totally reasonable ask.
As opposed to, for example, a woman appointed for them.
May I ask, Mr. Stewart, is this the same question that His Honour asked, or is there a difference? Are you just emphasising the point?
Well, I'm trying to understand your answer, Mr. Jackson. So if you can just address yourself to my question, what I've sought to do is to identify a very specific decision in the process. It's the decision as to is the wrongdoing established, and you've said that that's done by two elders who then report back to the body of elders, which then appoints a judicial committee. So I'm asking scripturally, is there room for that decision as to whether the wrongdoing has been established to be anyone other than elders?
The answer is there is no scriptural basis to bar women from being on an investigative committee. But they believe that women should have no role in anything at all at any point ever, even if it would be beneficial to victims. So the answer is no, they can't be, basically. But he doesn't want to come out and say that right now, I guess.
Good. I understand your question, Mr. Stewart. Could we take the case of where the two elders cannot speak to the victim, that perhaps they don't want to traumatize the victim, and maybe two women that are very close to the victim are able to speak to them. In a setting such as that, all the elders would have is the testimony of the two women with regard to the testimony of the victim. So in that way, the women are saying whether they feel that it's a valid case or not.
I don't think I understand what he's saying right now.
So the answer to your question is yes, women can be involved scripturally.
Well, okay. He's saying, can women be witnesses? We're not talking about can women be witnesses. We're saying can they be investigators? And he knows that. He's twisting this around intentionally.
But Mr. Jackson, my question had nothing to do with involvement. It had to do with who makes the decision. The person who makes the tea is involved, in a sense, if they bring the tea in when the decision's being considered. I'm not
right, exactly.
talking about involvement, I'm talking about who makes the decision. Am I to understand your evidence is that it must be elders who make the decision?
That is my understanding.
Yes. And are you able to furnish a scriptural reference for that? In other words...
No, he's not. He can't back this up scripturally.
Where it is that it's provided in the scriptures that is necessarily so.
The principle that we were discussing before is the headship principle found in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, and I'm sure, Mr. Stewart, you've already referred to this in the commission, but please bear with me as we look at it. 1 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 3. You have it there already?
Well, this time I'll be grateful for the page number, Mr. Jackson.
Okay, so 1536. Thank you. So, verse 3 of chapter 11. But I want you to know that the head of every man is the Christ. In turn, the head of a woman is the man. In turn, the head of the Christ is God.
Right. So they're trying to draw out the hierarchy, like the spiritual hierarchy or whatever. Women are below men. Men are below Christ. Christ is below God. That's the idea here. Except that doesn't mean women can't have any role in adjudicating things or contributing to this or that or investigating or whatever. That doesn't mean any of that stuff. Like, what's the dude even talking about? He thinks that this is like a W for him. It's not.
So in the church decision-making arrangement is based on the headship principle we have in the family and in the Jehovah's Witness community as a whole. That scripturally, the men make the final decisions, but that does not mean that there is no input from the women.
Well, that's what it means to Jehovah's Witnesses. He doesn't think there should be input from women. That's what's being asked right now. Can women give input on, CSA cases? Can they adjudicate or can they help investigate? And the answer in this dude's mind is no. And he's refusing to just come out and say that. He knows that the answer is no. He's lying here. He knows that he believes, and the rest of the governing body believe, women should not have a role in investigating cases of CSA. Just come out and admit it. Why is he lying?
While you're in 1 Corinthians, perhaps you would take a look at 1 Corinthians 14, verses 33 to 35.
I have it already, yes.
Which says that, for God is a God not of disorder but of peace, as in all the congregations of the holy ones, let the women keep silent in the congregations, for it is not permitted for them to speak. Rather, let them be in subjection, as the law also says. If they want to learn something, let them ask their husbands at home, for it is disgraceful for a woman to speak in the congregation.
Yeah, that's really interesting he brought that up, because women do have a role in Jehovah's Witnesses, like theology or whatever. They are allowed to go to the meetings, and they're allowed to pioneer, which means they're allowed to go door knocking all the time. They go out like 50 hours a month or 70, 90 hours a month. I don't know what it is now. It used to be like 70, I think. Anyways, they're allowed to do that. And also, they're allowed to do demonstrations on Wednesday nights. For me, it changes from congregation to congregation. They used to have these demonstrations of how you'd go door knocking. And, they'd try out some of the example presentations or whatever. And they were allowed to do that. That's teaching as far as I can tell, right? So they're willing to bend the rules a little bit for women. Jehovah's Witnesses are. But not for children, apparently. Not when it's in children's best interests. They're not willing to. Fascinating, right?
As I understand it, that's not applied in the Jehovah's Witness organization. In other words, you do allow women to speak in the congregation.
I'm sorry, you have two questions there. Can I answer the first one first? Jehovah's Witnesses do follow what is stated here. I can explain. The second one is...
Not really, they don't. Not really. Women do show up and listen to stuff at the Kingdom Hall, and they do demonstrations at the Kingdom Hall too, which is teaching.
Follow what is stated here. I can explain. The second one is, yes, women are allowed to speak in the congregation. May I explain to you the reason why I feel we do follow what is here?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so you notice in verse 34, that's where it says, keep silent. But if you look up at verse 28, there it says, but if there is no interpreter, he must keep silent. So the expression keep silent is referred to a male. And then verse 30, where it's talking about prophets. And then if one, in verse 30, it says, if another one receives a revelation while sitting there, let the first speaker keep silent. So this chapter is talking about orderly conduct in the church meetings or in the congregation meetings. So in verse 28...
Okay, I don't trust their interpretation at all. He claims to be a language expert, but I have to say, Jehovah's Witnesses have straight up changed verses in the Bible. Changed words entirely. Removed words, morphed them, moved them around. Some of them don't even really make any sense why they would. But every single Bible translation contains this specific word, and even the original Greek or Hebrew or Aramaic contains these words. But Jehovah's Witnesses removed it. No explanation, no reasoning. They just took it out. So I don't trust a word out of their mouths, and I certainly don't trust his translation of anything at all.
If someone starts speaking in another language, but there's no interpreter, the scripture says, let him keep silent. Now, it appears that in the current situation, there was a problem because some women were actually challenging, arguing, debating with the men who were taking the lead in giving teaching.
Oh, yeah, they're also allowed to answer at meetings. The way they have it set up is they answer at meetings too. Women do. So women are not allowed to argue with men. They're not allowed to give their input on anything, is basically what he's saying.
Now, you may not feel that that is the case, but that's the context of what is said here. And in chapter 11, it refers to the fact that a woman...
I don't trust that that's the context. I don't trust a word out of the guy's mouth. I'd have to look it up myself, which is totally doable. You don't have to take his word for it. You can look at the interlinear version of the Bible. Just Google it, interlinear Bible, Google the verse that he's talking about, and it pops right up. You can look at what the original language said and the context behind all of it. I just don't feel like doing it at this moment. But yeah, keep listening here.
Of what is said here. And in chapter 11, it refers to the fact that a woman could speak with a head covering. So I think...
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God. I totally forgot about that. Jehovah's Witnesses women will wear head coverings from time to time, depending on like what's happening in the situation. Like when I was 13 years old, 14, maybe 15, I don't remember. I think I was baptized at the time, maybe. No, I wasn't baptized yet. My mom was reading a Jehovah's Witness book with me, one of their books, and it was a rule in Jehovah's Witnesses: if a woman is teaching a man, she must wear a head covering. If she is acting as the spiritual lead of of the family, or acting as a spiritual lead over a man, she must wear basically a hijab. That's pretty much it. That's crazy, right? Is that just me? It's super interesting that he mentioned that just now, too.
With a head covering. So I think a very literal interpretation of verse 34 and 35 is not appropriate in the context.
Wow. Suddenly, he doesn't think that a literal interpretation is necessary. How about that? They think a literal interpretation is necessary in other contexts when it's absolutely not. But in this one, they don't think it's necessary. Like, for example, the story of Adam and Eve was very obviously not literal. God created, like, the earth in 6 literal days? Really? Just everything about their beliefs are nonsensical and ass backwards and contradictory. It's crazy.
Are you able to give an overarching explanation as to when it is that what is said in the Bible should be taken literally, and
there you go. That's a good question.
And when it should be given an expansive interpretation, as in this instance?
Very good. The answer is Jehovah's Witnesses, you see, it's not a matter of 7 men in the governing body taking one verse and saying, what do you think it means? What do you think it means? Jehovah's Witnesses try to use the Bible to explain itself. So here,
the hell does that mean?
Here in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, if we were to take the viewpoint that this literally means that a woman cannot speak, then we would be not going in accordance with the context. So the answer to your question is you have to have the whole picture, and that's something that...
That doesn't make any sense. Is it just me, or is that nonsense?
For yourself, and this is obviously said in all due respect, someone who reads the Bible their whole life should understand the whole picture. And if I, perhaps by means of helping you with regard to that, there are 2 other scriptures. One is in 1 Timothy chapter 2, which I believe is referred to in the commission. 1 Timothy chapter 2, that's page 1588. And there it says, verse 11 and 12, let a woman learn in silence with full submissiveness. I do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man, but she is to remain silent. Now, you notice the asterisk. gives the alternative to that to remain calm, remain quiet. So obviously this is
to remain calm and quiet. Now, that's so he's saying he's basically coming up with an excuse for why he allows women to talk in the congregations, is what it sounds like to me. Look, that's what the Bible says, okay? I'm not going to defend the shit that the Bible says if it's garbage. There's no reason to defend it, right? If it's terrible, it's terrible. But for what it's worth, I don't feel that the Bible defends shunning the way Jehovah's Witnesses practice it. They completely ignore context in that case. But they're willing to take extra context into consideration and, you know, work themselves into a pretzel to allow women to talk in a congregation in this case.
not jumping up excitedly, arguing with others. And it's similar to what...
What was that?
Quiet. So obviously this is talking about the role of women not jumping up excitedly, arguing with others.
Okay, does anybody in the congregation ever jump up excitedly and argue with others? Is that something that people usually do in congregations? That's not something I ever did. Did I have the option of doing that? You know what happens if you argue with others in the congregation? You get disfellowshipped for heresy, really. I'm dead serious. It's against the rules. You are not allowed to argue with others on matters of, spiritual subjects or whatever. Certainly not allowed to argue with, what the governing body has said. That is very against the rules. So I don't know what he's talking about here, honestly. No one is allowed to do this. They'll be disfellowshipped for it. Disfellowshipped, by the by, if you're unfamiliar with the term, it means you're shunned from friends and family forever.
Arguing with others. And it's similar to what 1 Peter, and please bear with me, 1 Peter chapter 3 says with regard to a woman who is married to a non-Christian. And in 1 Peter chapter 3, that's page 1623. Mr. Stewart, have you got it?
No, I haven't, but I'm sure you'll read it to me, Mr. Jackson.
Okay. And verse 1 of 1 Peter chapter 3, in the same way you wives be in subjection to your husbands, so that if any are not obedient to the word, they may be won without a word through the conduct of their wives. Now, to take the position that the expression without a word means they would never, ever, ever speak to their husband would be a misapplication of Scripture. So the governing body, when we consider these things, is very much aware of trying to get the whole context of things. Otherwise, it's like asking two people for an opinion on something and getting three different opinions. If someone just takes one verse, they can have all sorts of opinions about it. But the work of Jehovah's Witnesses is to try and understand the whole Bible as one message from God. Now, I don't expect that you would have the same viewpoint.
Yeah, that's nonsense. You shouldn't be taking the Bible as one single cohesive message from God. It was 66 stories, 66 books by 66 different authors told across thousands of years. That makes no sense.
One message from God. Now, I don't expect that you would have the same viewpoint, but I thank you for at least letting me express our viewpoint.
Mr. Jackson.
Well, why do you think that you won't have the same viewpoint? Why is that? Do you think maybe it's because it's absurd? It's a ridiculous viewpoint to have. It's like he's this close to self-awareness.
Let's make it a little more concrete then, in a very specific example. Now, you'll know that one of the things that's emerged in the last couple of weeks, that in Australia at least, amongst the Jehovah's, or in the Jehovah's Witness organization, there's a practice of not reporting child sexual abuse allegations to the authorities unless...
Yep, that's the problem. That's why they're there in the first place, because there's a culture of not calling the outside authorities, because they're supposed to act as their own government. You're not supposed to involve the outside world in any way ever, if at all possible. Now, they have, after this, they came out and kind of changed it to say, No one's going to be disfellowshipped if they choose to call the police. But as an elder, you shouldn't be doing it. The other person, the victim, should be calling the police, if anybody at all. So let's just step back, listen again.
In the Jehovah's Witness organization, there's a practice of not reporting child sexual abuse allegations to the authorities unless required by law to do so.
Exactly.
Do you accept that?
I'm not familiar with the statistics or the
We're not talking statistics.
general practice, but I can tell you why there is a spiritual dilemma because of this question.
Well, that's what I'm driving at. So perhaps you can address that question specifically, which is this: is there a scriptural basis to that policy being, or practice being, not to report child sexual abuse allegations to the authorities unless required by law to do so?
Thank you for the opportunity to explain this. I think very clearly Mr. Toole pointed out that if the Australian government and all
Mr. Toole? There's a Mr. Toole? Okay.
the states was to make mandatory reporting, it would make it so much easier for us. But the ethical or let's say the spiritual dilemma that an elder has is to consider, how did he get the information that he has been told? Now, there's a scriptural principle in the book of Proverbs, chapter 25.
Before he goes on, I bet I know what he's going to say here. Why is it an ethical dilemma that you would have to report it to the police? I bet he's going to pretend that elders are like priests, basically, who are receiving confession, because that's the legal argument they used in court cases. And interestingly enough, they lost those court cases. You know why? Because elders aren't like priests. They don't operate like priests. They're not paid like priests. They're not on the payroll. They don't live in the parish or whatever the hell priests live in. They're not priests. They are administrators at best. The priests of the organization are the governing body and the writing staff. The priest in a religious organization passes information down to the people. It explains the theology and proselytizes and stuff. Elders are not priests. They are there to provide the information that is being given to the people. I mean, they're receiving the information too. They're nothing more than normal members of the organization also. All of the information flows from the top down. Court cases and judges and juries have determined that elders are not considered priests and thus are not protected under church or priest penitent privilege or whatever it's called. They're not protected from like reporting anything under protected privilege, whatever it is.
Now, there's a scriptural principle in the book of Proverbs, chapter 25, and I'm not saying, Mr. Stewart, that any one of these principles takes precedent, but it is something that the elder would need to take into consideration. So Proverbs 25, verses 8 through 10. That's on page 905. That's Proverbs 25, 8 through 10. Do not rush into a legal dispute, for what you will do.
Oh, they're setting up the two-witness rule, I believe, right now. They're talking about a legal dispute, right? The legal dispute that they're referring to, it's like a civil matter. You know, you're trying to sell a donkey to somebody, and that person lies and says that you didn't try to sell the donkey or something like that, or they didn't pay you or whatever. That's the two-witness rule. That's why it exists. And they're applying this to criminal matters, not just like civil matters, right? Listen again.
Do not rush into a legal dispute, for what you will do later. For what will you do later if your neighbor humiliates you? Plead your case with your neighbor, but do not reveal what you were told confidentially, so that the one listening will not put you to shame and you spread a bad report that cannot be recalled. Now,
maybe that wasn't a two-witness rule. I guess they're probably talking about just bearing false witness or something.
I'm not saying, Mr. Stewart, this is the only factor, but it is one factor that all ministers of religion have grappled with when it comes to an issue such as this. The second issue is that elders are told, as is mentioned in 1 Peter and the 5th chapter, this is on page 1625, 1 Peter chapter 5 and verses 2 and 3. Have you got it, Mr. Stewart?
I do.
Yes. Shepherd the flock of God under your care, serving as overseers, not under compulsion, but willingly before God, not for love of dishonest gain, but eagerly, and then this is the point, not lording it over those who are God's inheritance, but becoming examples to the flock. The point being here, another aspect that an elder needs to consider is he does not have the authority to lord it over or take over control of a family arrangement where a person who, let's say it's a victim who is 24, 25 years of age, has a right to decide whether or not they will report that incident. They also respect the family arrangement that the appointed guardian, who is not the perpetrator, has a certain right to.
Oh, I see. Interesting. So he's saying, let me draw out a hypothetical, because this is a hypothetical that they're building off of. Jehovah's Witnesses don't believe in having friends with outsiders, right? They don't like having any connections with somebody who is not a Jehovah's Witness, right? Now, that means that whoever took advantage of somebody, of a kid or whatever, is a Jehovah's Witness. That's just how it works. If they were outsiders, they wouldn't care. So in this situation where a Jehovah's Witness has taken advantage of somebody, it should be taken far more seriously in their minds, because they don't want a bad reputation on Jehovah. They don't want to reproach Jehovah's name, is how they refer to it. That's what it's called. Oh God. Oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God, no. Okay. This is very difficult to do correctly. Holy Christ on a cracker, dude. This is just chaos right now. Oh God. Okay. Okay, we're good. We're good. I got it. Oh God. I can't step in that mud. Didn't see the mud. Okay, we're good. See? We're good. Oh God. We're not good yet. Okay, we're good. Sorry. Whew. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh, if somebody has taken advantage of somebody else, they are a Jehovah's Witness. And Jehovah's Witnesses are obsessed with not bringing reproach on Jehovah's name, quote unquote. They don't want to involve the outside world because it would look bad if they did. Now, in reality, any given population has somewhere in the range of 5%, 1 to 5% predators who are out to harm people in the congregation or in the whatever. The question is, how are you going to deal with that when it happens? The Catholic Church chose to move them from parish to protect them, hide them from the law. Jehovah's Witnesses chose to refuse to change their rules or standards, refuse to call the police under any circumstances. The way that they handled it was complete nonsense. And they refused to update their guidance on it. So anyways, yeah, that's what he's talking about here.
To decide whether or not they will report that incident. They also respect the family arrangement that the...
Right, and so he says he respects the family arrangement. If the person wants to call, then they can call the cops if they so choose. No! If you know about child mistreatment happening, CSA, call the cops. Call the cops. I don't care if the family arrangement doesn't want that. I don't care. This is an overt, obvious example of him protecting people who take advantage of children. He is protecting people from consequences of CSA. And why? Because he doesn't want to bring reproach on Jehovah's name. He doesn't want people to think that Jehovah's Witnesses are not good people. They run their own congregation, their own governments, effectively. They don't want anyone to think that they aren't handling things properly, so they're going to cover it up to make sure that people continue to think that they do. That's the bottom line here.
They also respect the family arrangement that the appointed guardian, who is not the perpetrator, has a certain right to. So this is the spiritual dilemma that we have, because at the same time, we want to make sure that children are cared for. So if the government does happen to make mandatory reporting, that will make this dilemma so much easier for us, because we all want the same goal, that children will be cared for properly.
Nonsense. If that's what you wanted, then open it up. Tell them to call the police, period. You have the choice of making them mandatory reporters. You can tell your people, your elders, to report it. It's that simple. Why are you waiting for the government to do something? Are you fucking kidding me? You don't have to wait for the government. You are the government for Jehovah's Witnesses. It doesn't get higher up than this guy. This is a governing body member. There are only a total of 9 of these guys, and they jointly control it. Are you serious? You want the government to take steps to force you to do the right thing? Is that what he's saying? That's what it sounds like he's saying right now.
We all want the same goal, that children will be cared for properly.
Let's take the situation in a
This is a joke, dude.
family where one of the children, let's say the eldest, reports having been abused by her father.
Yes, sorry, is there a question?
Yes, if that report is accepted as having...
I wasn't paying any attention on Breath of the Wild. It's just running. I should have been paying closer attention.
validity.
Yes, sorry, is there a question?
Yes, if that report is accepted as having validity, you would accept that the potential is that the other children in the family remain at risk.
That is correct.
And by not reporting to the authorities, is the case not that the confidentiality of the one who reported is regarded as being more important than to protect those who are still at risk?
Exactly. That's a good question. So basically what he's asking here is, damn confidentiality. Nobody cares. If somebody is being taken advantage of in a home with 3 kids, one of them has reported being taken advantage of, I don't care about confidentiality, and you shouldn't either. You should care about protecting children. That's the bottom line. And he's saying, darn it, if only the police would force me to do the right thing. I'm so disappointed, you know? I wish they would force me to do what I'm supposed to do. Give me a break. Do the right thing.
No, Mr. Stewart, if I could just, what I'm trying to highlight is there are several factors that make it hard for a minister of religion to make a clear-cut or quick decision on this matter. Obviously, I think...
No, it's not difficult to make the right decision here. Call the cops. Call the cops. If something is happening, call the police. And you're aware that it's happening, as he's saying in this situation. How can he possibly say this with a straight face? Really? You know why this is so ridiculous? Because Jehovah's Witnesses operate out of every country, to my knowledge, except for 7, I think, like North Korea and others. I think they operate out of China secretly. But anyways, they operate out of all of these countries. And they're saying if only, Australia would make us do the right thing, then we would be so much happier. Well, what about the other countries? You should be doing the right thing, period. There are, 192 countries on planet Earth now, right? Okay, if Australia and the U.S. and Germany make you do the right thing, what about the other 189 countries out there? What about them? It just blows my mind that they're so ridiculous. He's straight up saying, I wish we could, but That's just how it is. We just can't do the right thing. That's just how it works, you know?
I think, again, what has been a cut or quick decision on this matter. Obviously, I think, again, what has been highlighted to the Commission, the elders should encourage the guardian of the child or whoever is in that family arrangement that is not the perpetrator to notify the authorities.
No. The authorities should be notified, period. I don't care what is going on. If somebody finds out about this, the authorities should be notified. And that includes Jehovah's Witness elders. There's no excuse for it. None.
Leaving aside the question of overriding mandatory law from the civil authorities, do you see the possibility within the scriptures as you've identified them for a change in the practice of Jehovah's Witnesses? In other words, would it be within the scriptures for the Jehovah's Witness organization to adopt a policy which says that in cases where there are others at risk, a report must be made to the authorities?
That's an interesting question. Now, we have the benefit of hindsight because this happened in 2015, and this is like years and years later now, right? I can tell you exactly what happened as a result of this whole thing. The answer is they changed their elder's handbook to say, if the family, here are the instructions for elders. Elders are told if the family chooses to call the police, they are free to without having to worry about being disfellowshipped. It's not a sin to call the cops if the family chooses to. You keep your mouth shut. That's the change that they made in the 2021 edition of the Elders Handbook. It's 6 years after this meeting happened, after this Australian Royal Commission thing took place. They made that one change. So the answer really here is no, we're not changing anything. We're keeping it exactly the same as it is right now, and you can stuff it.
There are others at risk. A report must be made to the authorities.
That is a possible thing for us to consider.
It wasn't. He just lied. They were never going to consider it.
And I think already the assumption is there that if any elder was to see that there was some definite risk, that their conscience should move them to do that. But the point I was trying to make, Mr.
So, yeah, sure. Their consciences should move them to do that, absolutely. But you know what? They don't. Because there's a culture within Jehovah's Witnesses that you're not supposed to call the cops ever. Don't involve outside authorities under any circumstances. That's the rule. That's what it's all about. And the reason is because they believe the end is coming any 5 minutes now, and if you involve the outside authorities, then it exposes the organization to more risk when the end finally does come. Because they'll have a relationship with them, they'll know where they operate out of, and they'll be involved in the communities and everything else. You never involve outside authorities, ever, under any circumstances. That's the culture for Jehovah's Witnesses and for the elders specifically. So he says their consciences should move them to do that. Yeah, they should. But you know what? These guys, the governing body members, have molded the consciences of the people involved, of the elders. They've molded them into what they wanted them to be. They've modeled them into clones of each other. And by doing so, have virtually guaranteed they're not going to call the cops under any circumstances. So, yeah, this is completely made up, and he knows it is. He knows that people across the world, elders across the world, all 8.5 million Jehovah's Witnesses, or whatever it's up to now, are going to suffer because those elders believe that it's wrong to contact outside authorities. He knows their consciences aren't going to move them to do that because he formed their consciences through brainwashing.
But the point I was trying to make, Mr. Stewart, is there are other scriptural factors that maybe make that a little complicated, and it was certain...
No, it's not complicated. It's pretty straightforward, actually. If you find out somebody has been taken advantage of as a child, call the fucking cops. Call the cops. Nothing complicated about it. Call the police. It's pretty straightforward, actually. What could possibly complicate this? This is just stupid. What are they thinking, really? What a joke.
Scriptural factors that maybe make that a little complicated, And it would certainly be a lot easier if we had mandatory laws on that.
But you're not going to get them in every country that you operate out of. So people are going to suffer because they don't want to do the right thing. They have to be forced to do the right thing. Give me a fucking break. This is ridiculous. See, this is what I'm talking about right here. Jehovah's Witnesses watching this will know how obscene it is for them to say something like this.
Laws on that.
Now, turning to another aspect that we've dealt with, which is the question of the two-witness rule.
Right, I mentioned the two-witness rule earlier also. Again, it's just a system that was outlined in the Bible to protect people from, like, having somebody take advantage of them in a contract. You know, it's a civil thing. If you buy a donkey from somebody, the two-witness rule will guarantee that you get paid and that the guy gets the donkey, basically. It was a civil thing, not a criminal thing.
You will be aware that if there's no confession, then two witnesses to serious wrongdoing are required, or to two similar events of serious wrongdoing, in order that there is sufficient evidence to establish a judicial committee. Do you understand that?
I do understand that.
So now he's talking about the fact that if there aren't two victims, if two people haven't been taken advantage of directly by this person, then no judicial committee will be established, i.e., they're going to leave it in Jehovah's hands, quote unquote. They're just going to let what happens happen, which is a quick way to get more kids abused. It was very obviously taken advantage of, you know, over the past 30 years in just disgusting ways. People would take advantage of somebody and then move to a new congregation. Since they weren't allowed, since the elders weren't allowed to reveal that this person took advantage of somebody because there aren't two victims, they would just keep quiet. The guy would move to a new congregation. Nobody had any idea. He would reoffend. And then he'd move to a new one. And this just kept happening over and over and over and over again. Hundreds of people were taken advantage of by predators who were using that loophole in the system. And did they close that loophole? Not really. No, they didn't. They still have the two-witness rule in effect to this day. Now, if they just called the cops, it'd be one thing. They did close the loophole where, like, if there's been an accusation, then they will pass it along if they switch congregations. They closed that one. But they still need two witnesses to testify that somebody attacked them, or two victims, before they can disfellowship. So this person gets to remain part of the congregation. Anyways, the Elder's Handbook actually says if somebody has been accused of something, call the branch committee's lawyers, their legal department. Not call the cops. It says call the branch committee's legal department and inform them. That sounds like prepping things for a cover-up to me, honestly.
Is there a scriptural basis to that?
Right, so is there a scriptural basis to the two-witness rule? There is in civil matters, not in legal not in criminal matters.
The two-witness testimony, is that what you're asking, Mr. Stewart?
That's right.
Absolutely. If I could take you to the book of Matthew, chapter 18. Matthew 18. And that's on page 1330. Matthew 18.
Yes,
and here are
16.
the words of our Lord, verse 16, that's correct. The words of our Lord Jesus Christ. But this is talking in this.
For what it's worth, the only gospel that you should even consider, in my opinion, is the book of Mark. That was the first gospel. Matthew and Luke based their, writings off of Mark. Mark was the first testimony. It was the first gospel. John doesn't even belong in the Bible. That was written way, way later, and it wasn't written by anybody who was even there. And again, they used Matthew and Luke as a source rather than the original, which was Mark. And they all have glaring differences between each other. You shouldn't even be reading Matthew, Luke, or John. Just read Mark if you want the story. And even that has its issues because there are differences all through the different manuscripts that we have of Mark. But okay, he's going to read from Matthew. Let's listen.
the words of our Lord Jesus Christ. But this is talking in the sense of a judicial setting. And if he does not listen, take along with you one or two more, so that on the testimony of two or three witnesses, every matter may be established. So from this, and I can give you a list of several other scriptures, but I don't want to test your patience and take you to all these verses. But basically, this is a theme right through the Christian Greek scriptures, the New Testament, that the rules for evidence for a judicial hearing involve two witnesses. But
yeah, for civil matters, not criminal.
Please allow me to say further. This is only talking about setting up a judicial committee. It doesn't mean to say that Jehovah's Witnesses would feel that someone is totally 100% squeaky clean just because there was only one witness to the crime.
No, but it's specifically instructed in your book that you leave it in God's hands, i.e. walk away and pretend it never happened, if two witnesses do not come forward, or two victims. Doesn't mean they're squeaky clean, sure, but it means you walk away from the problem entirely. You pretend it didn't happen.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by 100% squeaky clean. I mean, the reality is if there's only one witness in the case of child sexual abuse, then it cannot be taken further by the elders.
There you go. Exactly right.
And as it's put in the literature, it's left in the hands of Jehovah.
Yep.
Yes, but please may I correct your comment on that with all due respect. You see, by squeaky clean, I'm meaning that it's not like someone being exonerated by a judicial hearing whereby there's double jeopardy and they can't be taken before the judicial hearing again.
Okay. I don't care? Like, why is he even saying this? When I say squeaky clean, I mean, we can bring this up later if a second witness comes forward. Great, fantastic. That doesn't help anybody right now. What? What is he talking about? Really?
Our literature has said, and we agree, that...
I don't give a shit what your literature has said. Notice he's quoting from literature now and not the Bible? Really?
Our literature has said, and we agree, that in most cases with children with child abuse, they are telling the truth. That's an established thing. They're not making up these stories. So immediately the elders would put into place protection measures.
No, they don't. That's the problem. That's why you're sitting in this fucking chair. Because they don't put into place like protection methods or whatever. That's the issue. They don't do that. They act as though nothing happened. They leave it in Jehovah's hands, quote unquote.
To help, to make sure that the family cares for the child and that due steps are taken to protect the child.
No, they don't. That's the issue. They leave it in Jehovah's hands. They pretend it never happened because they can't prove it, quote unquote, because there weren't two witnesses. Even if they, I'll just leave it at that. Because they can't prove it, quote unquote, because there aren't two witnesses. It's simply absurd. This dude's a joke. You know what they should do? This is what they should do. I would be so happy if they just put in the thing, call the cops. Call the cops. If they can't prove it but with two witnesses or rock solid evidence, they do nothing at all. Like a photograph or something would have to come forward before they do something about it without two witnesses. But you know what they should do? They should call the cops because cops have access to equipment and scientists and all kinds of stuff that will help them get to the bottom of the matter, whether there are two witnesses or not. Like, police have access to, like, fingerprint scanners and, DNA swabs and all kinds of stuff to find this stuff out, to get to the bottom of it. If they called the police would be able to put the full force of the justice system to work against this, to find the real answer. And you know what? If the person's innocent, if they really didn't do it, they can find that out too. They can exonerate. What can your ass do? You can poke around and look through their stuff and ask people in their lives if they've ever done something questionable around their kids, and then leave it in Jehovah's hands. Thanks. Thank you for that.
Due steps are taken to protect the child.
So I take it you say that that is what elders around the world should definitely do.
They should do, because Christian principles indicate if they realize a child is in a dangerous situation, action should be taken. The judicial hearing is simply us determining whether a person, the perpetrator, has committed a sin that would warrant them being put out of the congregation. But that doesn't mean to say we're stupid and that we think that someone hasn't done something.
Yeah, see, the problem is if they have done something, they should be charged with a crime. They're treating this like a sin and not a crime. That's really the issue here. So somebody called in the other day with a voicemail, and they asked me, they'll disfellowship for sneezing practically. How is it that people who commit CSA get away with it without being thrown out of the church? And the answer is CSA is a really serious crime, and it should be treated as serious, right? The police should be involved. The problem is if they can't unequivocally prove that they've done this thing, then it's as if they didn't do it at all. And they refuse to involve the police unless they can unequivocally prove it because they don't want to bring reproach on Jehovah's name. It works the same with, somebody smoking a cigarette. If they can't unequivocally prove that they smoked a cigarette through two witnesses watching it happen, then they'll wait. They'll just sit on it. They won't do anything about it. But they know eventually it'll come up because Jehovah's Witnesses are nothing if not gossips, and if anybody in the congregation knows anything at all, then it'll eventually come out. Child predators have had years, some of them decades, to hone their craft and get really good at hiding it from the world. That's why the cops need to be involved.
Well, I want to take you back then to the scriptural basis for that. So you've referred to Matthew 18, verse 16, and as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, that in turn really is a reference back to Deuteronomy 19, verse 15. In other words, what Jesus Christ was doing is referring back to that aspect of Mosaic law dealing with evidence.
He did quote, as he often did, from the...
Wow, that's really interesting. So Jesus was referring to Mosaic law. Now, here's the thing about Mosaic law. What that is, it's like the 10 commandments, basically. There weren't just 10, by the way. There were 613, at least. There were even more than that, really. And that is Mosaic law. Though it's like, don't eat shellfish, don't eat pork, don't wear cotton and linen blends, don't lie, don't blah, blah, blah. Go down the list. There's a ton of stuff. 600 and something of them, right? That's Mosaic law. When Jesus came back and died for everybody's sins, he did away with Mosaic law. It was erased. It was fulfilled. It was done. You don't have to follow the 613 commandments anymore, and that's why people eat shellfish. That's why people eat pork now, right? Because we're done with it. So what this guy's saying is the governing body member is referring back to the Mosaic law as evidence for why we should be following the two-witness rule, when in fact Jesus fulfilled the law and we shouldn't be following that anymore. That's an interesting position. Personally, I would have gone with the argument that this was for civil matters rather than legal matters. And, this is like the Old Testament and it's irrelevant now.
The Mosaic law, but he gave it Christian application.
So, but that is an element to be found in the Mosaic law as set out in Deuteronomy 19:15. Is that right?
It is an element that is found in both the Old Testament and the New Testament.
Now, what I'm interested in is, and perhaps you can...
Well, it's found in the Old Testament and it's referenced in the New Testament.
Help me on this, is that why that applies to a case of sexual assault when clearly what was being addressed in the reference in Matthew that you gave us was not a question of sexual assault.
Right, it was a civil matter, not a criminal matter. That's what he's saying.
Yes, if I can just clarify that a little further then. There are basic principles that the Bible highlights, and I can give you 2 Corinthians 13, verse 1. Sorry, Mr. Stewart.
Yes, carry on.
You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 19. It's not just a one-off verse, but this is a basic principle for rules of evidence.
It was in the Old Testament. We don't need that anymore because we have, a complex system where police can investigate a crime and send fingerprints through CODIS and do DNA swabs and, X-rays and everything. Humanity has advanced so rapidly in the past 100 years, it's absurd. And they are using Old Testament techniques to get to the bottom of it. And people are suffering as a result. That's really the issue here.
Found in the Bible. But if I could just emphasize again, this is only referring to a church-appointed committee that determines whether a person should remain in the congregation or not.
Great, then they should call the police when they find stuff out. He's saying we're not determining if this is like a crime or not. Yeah, except you're not leaving it to the police either.
The judicial system, and I'm sure if I can save the court's or the commission's time, I'm sure you're going to want to refer me back to Deuteronomy where it mentions the penalty of stoning. But what we need to remember is the laws that were given back in the nation of Israel. You had the judiciary, you had the punishment system, everything combined together. When the Christian arrangement came about, with our Lord Jesus Christ giving us direction, the Christian church does not have the authority to throw people into prison, to execute, or to do anything to them.
Exactly. So that's interesting he brings this up. Jehovah's Witnesses don't have the authority to imprison or, execute or anything. They have no penal consequences. So here's what they do. Since they don't have any way of punishing somebody for doing something wrong, they separate them from their friends and family permanently. That is their method of punishing somebody for doing something wrong. They can't put them in a physical prison, so they put them in a mental prison.
So the judicial system in the Christian arrangement involves the spiritual cleanliness of the congregation, and the rules of evidence remain the same all the way through.
Well, Mr. Jackson, that's exactly the point I want to get to. You'll be familiar, and perhaps we can go to Deuteronomy 22, 23 to 27.
My favorite verse is Deuteronomy 18:22, I think. It basically says, if somebody falsely prophesies, they're to be put to death. And you'll know that they're falsely prophesying when they say something that doesn't come true. And if they do, you should ignore them. That's basically what it says. Now, I don't stand for anybody being put to death. I'm very against death penalty. But the idea is sound. Jehovah's Witnesses don't seem to... the governing body, they don't seem to get that they falsely prophesied. The Bible has a very specific prescription for how to deal with what they've done. And that is, they should at the very least lose their congregation. They should be removed from leadership positions because they lied. They blatantly, flat out lied to people. They said they heard the voice of God and they did not. So that was 4 chapters earlier than what they're quoting here. I just want to go on that little rant for a second is all.
23 to 27.
Page 304. Mm-hmm. So where it said that if a man is found lying down with a woman who is the wife of another man, both of them must die together. Now, let me just preface this. I'm not addressing the question of the stoning. I'm addressing the question of evidence. The man who lay down with the woman as well as the woman. Sorry, I read that badly. Both of them must die together. The man who lay down with the woman as well as the woman. So you must remove what is bad out of Israel. Then it says, if a virgin is engaged to a man and another man happens to meet her in the city and lies down with her, you should bring them both out to the gate of that city and stone them to death. The girl, because she did not scream in the city, and the man, because he humiliated the wife of his fellow man. So you must remove what is evil from your midst. And then the next example is the one I'm particularly interested in. If, however, the man happened to meet the engaged girl in the field, and the man overpowered her and lay down with her.
The guy is saying, basically, if somebody is stoned to death, if somebody is caught committing adultery, they should be stoned. That's what he's saying, right? That's what he's referring to right now.
And the man who lay down with her is to die by himself, and you must do nothing to the girl. The girl has not committed a sin deserving of death. This case is the same as when a man attacks his fellow man and murders him, for he happened to meet her in the field, and the engaged girl screamed, but there was no one to rescue her. So the point of this last example is that there's no second witness, is there? Because the woman's in the field, she screamed, but there was no one to rescue her.
Oh, that's super interesting. So the guy gave an example of them not using the two-witness rule in the Old Testament. It sounds like the Old Testament, right? Deuteronomy 22, I think. So there are cases. Okay, the point here is they didn't use the two-witness rule for criminal things. They very specifically did different things for criminal acts. Two-witness rule is only for civil acts.
Could I explain, Mr. Stewart, that, you see, I think already under testimony, some of Jehovah's Witnesses have explained that the two witnesses needed can be, in some cases, the circumstances. I think, was it an example given?
Dude, what is he talking about?
I'll come to that, Mr. Jackson.
Okay, so
we'll get through this a lot quicker and easier if we just address it one step at a time. So the present step...
So the answer to your question?
The present step is this, is that in that example you accept it's a case where there was no other witness beyond the woman herself.
Thus proving that it applies to civil matters, not criminal matters. Right. Just blowing a hole right in their theology.
There was no other witness beyond the woman herself.
There was no other witness except the woman herself, but added to that were the circumstances.
Yes, well, the circumstances were that she was raped in the field.
And alone, with no witnesses. This is a direct one-to-one comparison to CSA. One witness, one victim. That's it. Just one. And they took action despite there only being one witness.
Mm-hmm. Yes, but they were circumstances.
And it was sufficient, there being only one witness, it was nevertheless sufficient for the conclusion that the man should be stoned to death.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Now, is it...
I think we're agreeing on the point.
Yes, is it not the case that had Jesus been asked about a case of sexual abuse, he may have referred back to this part of Deuteronomy and said that it's not required to have two witnesses?
I certainly would like to ask Jesus that, and I can't at the moment. I hope to in the future.
What a cop-out, dude. Are you kidding me? This is the equivalent of saying, well, this is just speculation. What a joke, dude. This guy is just a joke. This is just a joke. Dude was given an example that contradicts his beliefs directly and says, well, I mean, I guess we're just going to have to ask Jesus who was right. He's supposed to be able to talk to God. He's supposed to receive divine prophecy. What happened to being one of God's anointed people? What happened to that?
But that's a hypothetical question, which if we had an answer, then we could support what you said.
Well, it's hypothetical in a sense, but really what I'm driving at is the scriptural basis, and you the scholar, I'm not, is the scriptural basis to the two-witness rule really so solid, or is there not space for your governing body to recognize that in cases of sexual abuse, it need not apply?
Oh, it very obviously does have space. I mean, he just provided an example. If there's an example of it, that means there is absolutely space.
Again, if I could just mention the fact that we've already acknowledged that circumstances can also be one of the witnesses.
What? What did he say?
that circumstances can also be one of the witnesses.
Okay, so I think what is he saying that victims can be witnesses too? There don't have to be two witnesses necessarily, but the victim can be one of the witnesses. That's not helping anything. That's not contributing to anything at all. We are exactly where we started. This is a joke, dude.
Well, I'll come to that, but my question is a different one. It's whether the scriptural basis to the two-witness rule in relation to cases of sexual abuse has a proper foundation.
We believe it does because of the number of times that principle is emphasized in the scriptures.
Now, you'll be aware, of course, in the case of adultery, so long as there are two witnesses to the circumstances of opportunity, that will be sufficient.
Yes.
So, in other words, there needn't be two witnesses to the act of adultery itself, but only to the circumstances of opportunity.
Oh, that's super interesting. That's a really interesting point this dude just made. So you don't have to actually witness the situation. You just have to have two people who witness them walking into a house together. That's actually true. That's very true within Jehovah's Witness theology. All you have to do to be like guilty of adultery or to be disfellowshipped for it is for somebody to see you walking into a room alone with somebody else. They don't have to witness the event.
Sorry, you would need to walk me through that a little further.
Well,
I'm not quite sure.
I was trying to do it by a shortcut, but I'll take you to the document. It's in the same Shepherd the Flock book, which is...
Sounds like this guy forgot that that the dude had access to their elder's manual.
Tab 120 at page 61. So you'll see you have paragraph 11 there.
Paragraph, yes, I do.
So this is also in the chapter dealing with determining whether a judicial committee should be formed. On the subject of evidence testified to by at least two witnesses that the accused stayed all night in the same house with a person of the opposite sex or in the same house with a known homosexual under improper circumstances. That's the heading.
Right. So if somebody walks into a room alone with a homosexual, a known homosexual, God, this is bad. They are effectively guilty of adultery. The rules are so loose for this specific thing, but strict for everything else. Fascinating, right?
And then it goes on to say elders should use good judgment in assessing the situation before forming a judicial committee. And in the second dot point, it says if there are no extenuating circumstances, the judicial committee would be formed on the basis of strong circumstantial evidence of porneia. And you'll see at the foot of the page there's an example of a married brother spending an inordinate amount of time with his female secretary, and two lines from the bottom it says later when he claims to be leaving overnight for a business trip, his suspicious wife and a relative follow him to the secretary's home and they observe essentially the opportunity of adultery to have taken place, and then those two witnesses will be sufficient to establish the case. Do you see?
That's super interesting. Oh my God, I gotta write this one down too. 152.41. Hang on. You know, I didn't even think about that. This guy is absolutely on point. This is really interesting, I think.
Will be sufficient to establish the case. Do you see that?
I do see that.
So now, in the case of child sexual abuse, it should be, should it not, that a witness to an opportunity for the sexual abuse to have taken place would be the sufficient second witness.
Yes, if there is no, what does it say here?
Extenuating.
So if two people are aware that this person was in a room alone with a kid at any point at all, if there was an opportunity for this to have taken place, then there should be a judicial committee formed. But would you be surprised to find that it's not? That they don't consider that good evidence? They consider it good evidence or sufficient evidence or whatever to disfellowship somebody for buying a pack of cigarettes. If two people see someone buy a pack of cigarettes, that's sufficient to determine they had the opportunity to smoke and they were likely to smoke, so they can be disfellowshipped for buying a pack of cigarettes, even if they didn't see them smoke it. It's sufficient if they see two people walk into a room together, alone. But that same standard of evidence is not applied to CSA. That's fascinating, actually. That's a really interesting angle he's taking.
Under improper circumstances.
So a second witness to circumstantial or corroborating evidence would be sufficient to fulfill the second witness requirement.
That's a very...
Wow, he just got himself caught in a little trap there. I love it, dude. That's awesome. I mean, this is why Jehovah's Witnesses should watch this. This is why every ex-Jehovah's Witness should see this, because it shows the hypocrisy and ridiculousness of their positions.
That's a very large question, and I think it's something that we would need to consider carefully.
A large question, he said. Would you be surprised to find out that they never made a change? They never fixed it? 8 years later, and we're still waiting for them to make sufficient changes.
Yes, well, it's just important as to whether the second witness has to be a witness to the abuse itself, or to what extent it can be, he or she can be a witness to circumstantial or corroborating evidence. So let me use an example. What about the trauma, evident trauma of the survivor? Would that be able to be taken into account as corroborating evidence?
Yes, it would need to be taken into account. And if I could mention, Mr. Stewart, these are the things that we're interested in following up on after.
And they never did. They never followed up on it. How about that, huh?
To the Royal Commission, just to make sure that everything is in place, because certainly these are the things we're interested in.
Yes, but you'll understand, Mr. Jackson, what we're interested in is how much room you have to move, as it were, to what extent you're bound by the scriptures, and to what extent you have flexibility to change your processes.
That's right. Well, may I mention... Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
I was going to say to His Honour, would that be a convenient time for a lunch adjournment?
Mr. Jackson, what did you want to say?
I was just going to say I thought that had already been established in the hearings, but if not, certainly that's something that we need to follow up on.
Very well.
Completely full of it, dude. The dude just blatantly lied through this entire thing. It appears they're going to take a lunch. There is more to this, and I may end up watching more of it. We'll see on my channels. But wow, dude, that was fascinating. They just did they did a knockout on this guy's theology. Just destroyed it. They deconstructed it, and that was really interesting to watch. Every Jehovah's Witness, every ex-Jehovah's Witness should watch this, really. This is important stuff. Anyway, let me know what you think about it in the comments. I was fascinated by that.